Hello, everyone. Jordan Danser here with the Mended Collective, and I'm joined by my friends Rebekah Bardoel.
Hi.
And Mike Hall.
Hello.
And we want to talk a little bit about Bible study today. So we've all read the Bible before, and we want to go a little deeper. Well,
Yes, we have.
okay, all right. So just checking. That was actually a check. Great. We've all read the Bible before, and I hope you have too. And sometimes you want to go a little further than just reading through it in like a reading plan or something like that. We've got videos on that here on our channel. Hope you check those out. But you want to go a little bit deeper, and you want to begin to study. So you open your Bible and you say, I'm going to study this passage. What do you do? How do you start to untangle this? Mike?
Well, for me, if it's a passage or a chapter or a book, I'm going to kind of separate that a little bit from maybe a subject on a study. But the very first thing I want to do when I tackle something like that is to just read it a whole bunch of times, maybe multiple readings through multiple days.
Okay.
And what that does is just kind of get my mind thinking on that, and it begins to cause me, as I dwell and meditate on those, to begin to have some questions.
Sure.
Things I don't understand, names, places, people, words, and just kind of really draw that out to see what is it that I've been assuming, what is it that I don't know, and just spend some time meditating on that before I actually dig into anything. So step one is lots of reading.
I think that's great. So would you consider keeping a list of questions as you went potentially?
Yes, I mean, that's exactly what I do. So let's say I've got the Bible open here in front of 1 Timothy chapter 5, which is all of a whopping 25 verses here. And so that wouldn't take me long to read, and I will read it. Let's say I was going to start this today. I'd read it 3 or 4 times today throughout the day, and as I'm doing that, I'm going to keep a list probably on my phone that I have with me at all times, and that's probably where I'm going to do the reading at.
Sure.
And just keep a list of questions, points, things that jump out to me that I want to look deeper into. Doing that also helps me get a sense of context.
So let me ask you another question too, because I know a lot of people start with this, and I think this is usually what I start with too whenever I want to study a text. Sometimes I'll use different translations to kind of give a different flavor. Do you do that with what you're doing, or do you try to stick with one? What do you think?
I may change translations on days.
Okay.
I want to stick with one translation throughout a day, just because the wording is going to catch my attention. Sure. If I'm constantly switching, if I read it in the King James and then I turn around to the New King James, that's going to draw some things out to me. But I'm going to miss some things from just constantly staying in that one.
Okay.
Whether it's the New King James, ESV, or whatever it is, the more I read that one over and over, it'll draw things out. Then the next day, when I read a different translation, I'll be able to make some comparisons between the two, plus draw things out of that translation that catch my attention.
All right, so read it a lot. Rebekah, what do you do? Maybe you read for a little bit. What do you start doing after that?
Yeah, so I mean, after I've read quite a bit, that's also a good place to start. I like to take a step back and look at some of the history, or contextually, where are we at in Bible times? What's going on at the time that I'm reading at? Who is speaking? Who are they speaking to? And because that'll help me understand, how are they going to receive these words that are being spoken here? Who are they even for? Sometimes we read things and we automatically put ourselves in the passage, but sometimes they're not even to us, right? And so we need to be careful of that. And a third thing I would look at is, is there commands here that I need to learn from? Is this Old Testament, New Testament? What kind of context are we looking at? I think that's really important to start.
I want to speak on that a little bit about putting ourselves in the Scripture. I do believe that the primary purpose of Bible study is self-application. And so there's that great temptation to ask myself, well, what does this say to me? As if it's going to say something unique to me that it wouldn't say to you. Yeah. But you bring out a great point here of what did it mean to those that it was written? Yeah. And something that's challenging but can be very beneficial is to try to take on the mindset of those that this was written to. Sure. What was life like for them? This letter coming from Paul. Who is Paul to these people? Did they really respect him? Did they reverence his teaching? Did they recognize it as authoritative? We read in 1 Corinthians how some didn't think very highly of Paul, and others there did, and so kind of a mixed message. What would they have thought of this message? Yes. And I think that's a challenge to try to place ourselves as the actual audience that received this letter before we place ourselves in, modern day America.
Yeah. Sure, yeah. We've got to cross that contextuality.
Yes. Romans chapter 12 was written to no, it wasn't. It was written to the church at Rome. Has application to me living in modern day America, as well as it has ever since it was written. but to fully understand it, I need to be in the context.
Yeah,
So
totally agree.
let me ask some more questions here because I think this is great. So you compile this list of questions. Rebekah, as you're reading, do you compile any sort of list of things, or do you have some observational strategy you use to help you find it?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's different strategies that you can go about using, but there is one observational method that I've found really helpful in studying, and that's to just find some repetition. Like, you talked about earlier, finding the repetition is really useful because it helps you. What are the key things that this passage is hitting on? What are the key topics and themes that we notice through this? Some other things are, what are some words that I don't actually know? Starting with that, because if I don't know what we're talking about here, then I can't really grasp what we're understanding, right? And then going back to the original definitions of those words is really helpful too. If you have like a Strong's dictionary, something like that can help you define that. And some other things that I like to look at through the passage are maybe what are the attributes of God here? What am I seeing about who God is? We talked about theology in some of our earlier videos. Another one is what are some ways I can take this passage and then reword it, if you will, so that I can get the full application from it, right? So how can this apply to me, and how can I summarize this in a way that I can fully understand it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so not to put ourselves in it to like remake the passage on our own deal, but just to put in our own words of what's going on here, to take it from that language and to put it in a way that's helpful to us. I think that's great. I will, a lot of times, I'll do things like this. I'll find a lot of observations. So I've got a checklist that I go down that has some observations on it of what are the repeated words, what are the questions that I have, what are the words that are unfamiliar. I like to find what are the verbs and sometimes what are the pronouns doing in here. And kind of this little conjunctions.
I flunked English,
so I learned it for this deal. What are the lists? Maybe we could find lists, right? These sorts of things to try and just untangle all the grammar and what do they actually mean to the people here? These sorts of things I do. Okay, so what else?
Well, I want to come back to something that Rebekah said. Certainly what you mentioned there, that this idea that you have of these observation lists, extremely valid, but she mentioned defining words.
Sure.
And I want to highlight that a little bit, and this is where the value of using various translations comes in, because there might be a word that I think I know the meaning to, especially if I'm studying out of King James. Looking at a word and reading a word like
that's
conversation.
Yeah, wait, you're studying out of, okay, all right, that's fine. If you were to study out of the King James,
I study out of the King James,
do
the
too
New King,
sometimes.
use all of them. But if I'm reading the New King James and I come across a word such as conversation, now we all know what that word conversation means. It's what we're having here, right?
Right.
In the King James, it doesn't mean that. It means conduct. And if you were to read that in the New King James, the ESV, you'll see that it says conduct. And so that's going to send me back to look up the Greek definition or the Hebrew definition. And I do want to say it's important to go back to the Greek and Hebrew definitions as opposed to pulling off Webster's dictionary and defining Bible terms with American terms.
Right.
You're not going to get that full picture. And so I think that's important to jump in there. Once you begin to do that, you're getting a sense of these key passages. That's when you can begin to go in and start answering some questions and maybe cross-referencing to other passages and trying to plug things back together in that. But I think the importance of a Bible study is getting off to a good start instead of just skimming real quickly and jumping to the interesting stuff, but to take your time and really soak your way into the passage.
Sure.
And one way you can do that is, whether it's a chapter or a passage, is memorization.
Sure.
I'm a big believer in memorization. I know all of us can memorize. We like to tell ourselves, I can't remember things. And the truth is we all have useless knowledge stored away in our head.
Right.
And that knowledge is there because we value it and we want to hang on to it. And we need to treat the scriptures that way as I'm studying.
Well, I think about that with how Jesus talks about man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God.